Hello and welcome back to this downflow dualistic crusade. This video is a review of the La La Land Records limited edition 2-disc CD set reissue of the Danny Elfman score for the first Mission Impossible film from 1996. I've always had a great fondness for this score. I think it's the one really great, memorable score of the Mission Impossible series, and it's also the one, like the first film, that most closely aligns with the taut suspense thriller of essential feel of the original show. And since the first film is all about being a mind game and sort of being a deconstruction of the original Mission Impossible series format, the score perfectly reflects this and has many of the sort of core Danny Elfman isms that Elfman fans are very much aware of and part of any Danny Elfman score. So it has his touch all throughout it, even while it is reprising the two main themes, essentially, of Lalo Schifrin's original TV score, the original iconic theme, and his theme entitled The Plot, which is basically the sort of unofficial theme to the show. Both of those are used throughout the score in particular moments, but Elfman does come up with other themes for our lead characters and a sort of the dark undercurrent of spycraft and the darkness of working in the IMF, and a sort of love theme for the essential love triangle that is there in the beginning of the film, but its intensity was reduced in the final edit. But we at least get some of that still, and that becomes the sort of dark, doomed romance motif that does pop up as a what you could label a romance theme, even though, again, it's very diluted in the final edit of the film. Now, talking about the edit of the film, there is quite a bit of history with the film's production and the music, because originally Danny Elfman was not the composer. It was Alan Silvestri who actually did, apparently, I guess he did record the whole score, or at least certain portions of it, but it was deemed not really what they were looking for, and so he was actually replaced with Elfman very late in the game. Again, it's unknown just how much of Silvestri's score was recorded. There are some pieces that have leaked around online that do claim to, or at least seem to be, portions of the unused Silvestri score, and it's also said that he reused a lot of these elements for the film Eraser. So if you watch the Schwarzenegger vehicle, Eraser, apparently, if the rumors are true, you can look at that and imagine the Silvestri score there as potentially what was his rejected Mission Impossible score. So this means that basically Danny Elfman was brought in because he was available and everybody thought that he would be a good choice, but he didn't have a lot of time, and it said that he had maybe somewhere around 3 weeks, or maybe a little bit more than that, maybe 3 to 5 weeks to do the entire score and then have it ready for the film's 1996 release. So that means composing, recording, editing, spotting to the picture, and doing all the cues and everything, and start to finish, and like a 3 to perhaps 5 week marathon session. So that means that obviously there was pressure, and with the film having a tumultuous production and the script constantly changing, I'm sure that didn't help either composer when they were on the film. And again, as I alluded to, there is a romance subplot that's still there in the film, but because of the way the film was very much pared down, that was one of the things that was very much subdued. And if you're an active viewer, you still pick up on these things. It's still there, but it's not made explicit. So the score keeping that motif does help to heighten the elements that are still there. But it does seem like Elfman was scoring for the much stronger romance subplot that was, pretty much ultimately very much dialed down from the final release version. I do think this is a very inventive score. I think it has Elfman's fingerprints all over it, but if you don't listen to this score on its own a number of times, I don't think most people are going to think of the score as separate from the film, because it is very much timed to all the specific moments. And of course, the big central Langley heist sequence is meticulously cued and spotted to all the specific moments in the film. What I find interesting about Elfman's score is that it's not only a very dynamic recording, because this is actually a very dynamic score, and that fits a film with what I think has one of the best sound mixes of the 90s, and a Brian De Palma film as well. It's going to be, very meticulously crafted in terms of the sound design and the sonic landscape. But the film uses silence frequently, and the score understands this. Danny Elfman understands this, but he also knows that he has to incorporate little elements of humor, elements of levity to not only lighten things up in certain moments, but also in a lot of ways that actually helps to build the suspense in the main heist sequence. But he also has various motifs for the characters, for the elements of spycraft. There is a sense of weightiness throughout the score. There's a sense of mystery and distrust, which is all basically replicating what the Ethan Hunt character goes through in the starting right in the opening, which is, of course, the mission gone wrong, and then he spends the rest of the film disavowed and essentially on the run, and the score reflects this perfectly. And I think also because it's a very dynamic score, it's able to go between light and dark and loud and soft at perfect intervals, and it is meticulously timed to match every single moment, every little beat of each sequence. So if you're listening to it on its own, it's one of those scores that it's very subjective. It doesn't immediately jump out to you outside of the biggest action cues as, oh, this is a big action movie score and I can just listen to tracks while I'm working and stuff. It's one of those soundtracks I think that's good to return to, and I think the more times you listen to it, the more you're able to appreciate it as a score separate from the film, but you still picture the moments from the film when you're listening to it, because again, it is specifically spotted to match all the little individual beats of each of the sequences and even the dialogue scenes. It is perfectly matching the internal character motivations and all of the little quirks of each sequence. It does have that sort of energetic quirkiness to it that is, I think, part of the best Danny Elfman scores. That's sort of how I would term some of his style, a sort of energetic quirkiness, a type of, it's that signifier that you know who the composer is without knowing the credits, because you hear their style, you hear a bit of them in there, and that's what I've always loved about the Elfman scores that really resonate with me the most. And this really is one of them. It's a very subdued score in places, but I really love the dynamics of what's here. And again, that perfectly enmeshes with the sound mix, which does nicely use the Elfman music in the biggest moments, but it doesn't completely bury it in the quiet moments. There are some parts where they do dial out a little bit of some of his cues, and make them even more subjective, but that's just in terms of the mixing design. So ultimately, I really enjoyed returning to this score in this way on the La La Land Records release, because this is a 2-disc affair that not only gives us the original album presentation from the 1996 CD, which Elfman supervised, but it does actually give us the expanded score, which is significantly longer and does not feature the same edits and combinations as the original CD release. So this is a soundtrack reissue that actually gives us both the original album program and then the fully expanded program. So in 1996, we got the Point Records CD release of the soundtrack. Now, this is still a nice listen. It's a pretty substantial runtime. It does give us most of the score, but Elfman and the producers did combine some tracks and make some edits, so you are missing a significant chunk of the score, and not all of these tracks are what you hear in the film. They're a little bit different in terms of the edit. So this is still an impressive soundtrack CD, and it's not technically rare, but it is one of those you do have to specifically track down, and usually it goes in the $20 to $30 range or more. It took me a while to find an affordable copy, but you can always tell by the cover art that you're getting the soundtrack CD and not the music from or the music inspired by CD, which is ultra common. The interior is pretty simple, but this was the only score release we had, and it's still one of the more impressive soundtrack CDs of the 90s because this also doesn't have any loudness compression on it. This has a dynamic range meter score of 12 overall, with some tracks getting up to 14. So again, going to what I was saying before, this is a pretty dynamic score for the time, because this was at the point where even soundtracks are starting to get hit with loudness compression, and it's one that you do or you're able to listen to and enjoy even on headphones, but you might have to turn up the volume a little bit because the dynamics are fully intact, and it's an enjoyable headphone listen as well. The booklet is pretty simple. It's just black and white with your basic credits and a little bit of imagery, and then of course seeing the rest in reverse in color. Much more common is the music from CD, which also gives you the closing or remixed instrumental of the iconic theme by Adam and Larry from U2. That was not included on the original score CD. This does have at least a bit more mission-themed artwork for the label and such. It looks nice, and this is pretty common, so you can get it for not very much or next to nothing, really. But it does give you, of course, songs that were not even used or included in the film, as was common at the time. You do get a much fancier fold-out in terms of all the song credits and more color imagery from the film. And now we come to the La La Land Records 2 CD reissue with the original theatrical artwork. So it does distinguish itself from the prior releases a little bit. So, but gotta make sure you're getting this instead of the original music from and inspired by. The rear also has unique artwork, and this gives you the complete track listing. And disc 1 is pretty much a direct copy of the original Point Records CD, so it does preserve the original soundtrack CD edits of the tracks and runs just under an hour, and has the same dynamic range score pretty much, so it seems like a direct copy, so that has not been compromised, so now you don't have to have the original if you don't want to track that down. But disc 2 is the newly expanded and restored score, which runs basically an extra 22 minutes and does give us some bonus alternative tracks in terms of 2 alternates, or I guess technically 4 if you count all the different cues. So 4 alternate cues, including a complete alternate cue and mix, basically a whole alternate take of the entire finale music inside the tunnel with the helicopter. And then we also get an alternate version of Red Handed, and that's actually labeled an alternate ending, so apparently that was originally considered as being used in the slightly different endings that were planned. And then we get to the disc label itself, which nicely replicates the original soundtrack CD cover artwork, so you have that replicated in some form. And then under the hinge tray, we have disc 2, which gives us a version of the original key poster artwork. Then the interior tray art's a nice shot of Hunt's mugshot at the on the Langley video wall. Then we come to the booklet, which runs about 20 pages. As always with La La Land releases, we get nice imagery, well printed. This has a nice Jeff Bond essay about the score. He talks about De Palma working with Elfman and what Elfman brought to this score and how he utilized the Schifrin original themes and did new arrangements of them and also further incorporated that into his score. He also quotes Elfman talking about how that was a bit of a challenge because that meant he no longer had his own main title, so he had to find other ways to establish the themes of his score and also intertwine them with the iconic Schifrin cues and make it all work with what Brian De Palma was doing. Now, the rest of this goes through on a track-by-track basis and has a little discussion of each track, the cues, and then the edits made for the original soundtrack release, and then the elements that were restored for the second disc. So this is a really helpful breakdown going track by track of all the material that was restored and then why it was originally cut and how it differs basically between disc 1 and disc 2. Then there's even a little bit on the additional music at the end of disc 2. So, as always, even with the booklets, La La Land goes all out for the printing, imagery, and information included. And of course, this is a limited release. Now, at the time of recording this video, this is still in stock, but it is in very low quantities. They've already sent out emails, if you get their emails from La La Land Records, that they are about to sell out of this. So, if you're interested, I do strongly encourage you to pick up a copy of this before it sells out and becomes rather expensive, because the disc 2 is the real draw, because you're getting the expanded score plus the alternates and things, but you also get a replication of the original CD as well, and both of them have not been hit with loudness compression. So just like disc 1, disc 2 does have an overall DR meter score of 12, with some getting up to 14 or higher. So it's basically the same dynamic range has not been altered on either disc. So this also means you get the expanded score plus alternates plus lovely new liner notes, but you also get a perfect replica of the original CD should you wish to have the original program, and neither has been hit with loudness compression. So I do strongly encourage people to check this out. It is a very underrated Elfman score. It's one of my favorites of his, and again, it's the one score of the series that I find really memorable, and the one I really enjoy the most, just like I enjoyed the first film the most of the series. Unfortunately, this will sell out, so I do strongly encourage people to pick up a copy before it sells out completely. I'll leave a link to La La Land's website in the description below. Hopefully this video comes out before it does completely sell out, but if it does, then you will have to turn to various stores and third-party sellers. Now, there is a vinyl version of the soundtrack now. Mondo did do rather nice artwork and various vinyl reissues of at least all 6 of the Mission films, up to and including Fallout, and I think they're doing Dead Reckoning as well. But the artwork of them is nice, and they're 2 LP sets for most of them, but I do believe they are using the original soundtrack CD program. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure they're using the original 1996 program, and it's probably, I'm sure it's digitally cut vinyl. So I don't think you're going to get all of the expanded cues on here on that vinyl release, but it could be possible they used the La La Land master. Either way, it's going to be a digital cut vinyl release from probably the same master La La Land was working with. So I'd really just recommend to go ahead and get this version before it sells out, because you're getting both discs plus the nice liner notes. And then should you wish to have the score on vinyl as well, you can get the Mondo edition, which I do believe there's at least a standard version still in print. So there are those options as well should you want the score on vinyl. So those are my thoughts on the La La Land Records 2 CD limited edition reissue and expansion of Danny Elfman's score for Mission Impossible. I think this is another excellent, must-own, phenomenal La La Land release, just like pretty much everything they do. I think they're one of the best labels in boutique soundtracks. I mean, really all the boutique soundtrack labels going above and beyond and put all this amazing effort into these phenomenal releases they do. It's just a matter of keeping up with them, and because they're all small labels and having to license all these things, their releases are a bit on the pricier side, but it's well worth it for scores that you're a big fan of, and it's especially a better idea to purchase them before they go out of stock, because once they do, you'll regret it, and they become very, very expensive on the used market. So unfortunately, that'll probably happen with the Mission release when that does go out of print, but I do strongly encourage people to pick this up, check it out if you're interested, because you're getting both the expanded score and the original 1996 master program on 2 different discs, plus nice liner notes, and most importantly, with wonderful sound that retains all of the original dynamics of the recording, so you can really enjoy returning to this score and living with it outside of the film. And I think it's a wonderful score to delve more deeply into, because there's a lot of nuance and quirkiness and humor and nice brooding darkness throughout. So there is even a tinge of Elfman's Batman score in there in terms of there is a little bit of flavor of Batman and Batman Returns here and there because it is the same composer. So if you love Elfman's darker scores, this is perfect for you. And then it does go into the big moments of action bombast when it's called for, and it so perfectly suits those scenes that I really enjoy the bombastic parts of the score, particularly the finale in the tunnel. I really love what he did building that whole sequence, and then getting to the final moment, and then comparing that with the alternate take on the expanded CD is a fascinating study in film music composition. So I think the alternates provided as bonus tracks are really important and fascinating for those aspects. So I do encourage people to check this release out. If you've gotten the La La Land release or you're a big fan of Elfman's score for the film, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Again, I'll leave a link to La La Land's website, and I do encourage people to check this out and pick up a copy before it does completely sell out. So please do support these boutique soundtrack labels wherever possible by purchasing releases directly from their website stores. They're all doing amazing work, and I'm a giant fan of what La La Land Records has been doing with their amazing releases. So, as always, I hope my babblings about films, physical media, film music, and soundtrack releases have been at least somewhat fun and informative. And thank you ever so much for watching.